everyone, and welcome to Thorough Newspaper Analysis, which is presented to you by Losico. Today, we will be discussing three articles. The first two articles are from the Hindu newspaper, and the third article is from the Indian Express. The first article from the Hindu is Doubling Down on a Resilient India. So, this article basically talks about that how, even in the times of COVID-19, India has found a way to make its economy stronger and resilient, and how the foreign direct investments have helped a lot in this direction. The second article is How to Treat Unpaid Work. This basically talks about the paying of women's work in the domestic course, and how the government can take the progressive steps in making and bringing women equal and at par with the men, and bringing them into the labor force as well. Thirdly, right to counsel in custody. This talks about the legal right to counsel as well as of having a legal aid or representative while a person is in custody, and what are the legal provisions provided for this in the Indian criminal system. And finally, we have the News and Flash column. Before we move further, let's have a look at the Project Maverick, which is almost free CLAT prep course from Lawseco. So why are we calling it as almost free? Because it's only for ₹100. The link to this course is available in the description box below. And if you are planning to crack CLAT 2021 or 2022, this is the right thing for you. With this, let's see what is the multiple choice question from day before yesterday's discussion. International Day of Happiness is observed on. Your options are 15th March, 20th March, 21st March, or 22nd March. You can write down your answer in the comment section below. This is the descriptive question for the day. What do you mean by right to legal aid? What are the provisions available in the Indian legal system? With this, let's start the discussion for our first article, which talks about increasing the FDI, which is the foreign direct investment inflows in India. Before we begin, let's understand what do we mean by the foreign direct investment. So as we know that we as an Indian country, or we as a nation, follow the norm of globalization. So wherein our economy interacts with various economies at the global front, and thus various companies, institutions, and investors want to come and invest in our country. Thus, if we try to break it down, it stands for the direct investment that comes from various foreign companies or foreign investors. Like, for example, if Google wants to invest, let's say, $1 billion in any kind of technological intervention or any kind of technological growth or project in India, that would be considered as a foreign direct investment, because Google altogether is a company that belongs to America, but still it wants to stretch its arms and wants to invest in the territorial jurisdiction of our country, that is India. So that would be considered in the general sense as the foreign direct investment. Recently, Google, Facebook, Walmart, Samsung, Foxconn, and Silver Lake are some of the foreign firms that make big investments in India as of 2020. So, $60 billion plus tally have been there for new annual FDI flows, and the majority went into the Reliance Jio company. So, as we know that in the times of COVID-19, the situation of economy was not good, keeping in mind any country for that matter. But India has been faring well after the lockdown period, and thus these foreign direct investments that have been coming into the country have really helped to boost the economic growth, and thus stabilizing the conditions of the global economy as well as the economy at the national front. But there are some issues that are attached in the Indian market. What are they? Firstly, frequent shifts in policies. This is one major problem that the Indian government, or basically the Indian economic system, faces, due to which the companies that want to invest from the foreign world into our country face a problem in finding a stabilized and a level playing field in the country. What happens is that to attract the foreign direct investments, there are various policies that the government comes through. Now, this can be relaxation in the taxes, or it can be providing special zones for economy. It could be regarding the exemptions in particular, corporate taxes, or various other steps that can be taken to attract or to incentivize the foreign investors to come and invest in the country. But many a times what happens is that various global as well as national or regional, or as we the domestic reasons, they make these policies to shift and to change their basic tenets, due to which this instability causes a kind of disincentivization for the foreign investors to come and invest in the country. And that is why these frequent shifts in the policies often make or often show the Indian market to be very much volatile in nature, and thus it disincentivizes the people or the investors to come and invest in the country. Second, persistent market barriers. Now, when we were talking about the ease of doing business, there are various market barriers that are there in the economy. For example, this could be regarding the problem in registering a particular company, the problems in finding the labor that might be skilled or might be particularly required for for a specific manufacturing activity. Then there could be problem with the provision of electricity, other road facilities, etc., or even the system of taxations, etc. So there are various persistent, that means that actually exist such market barriers that do not incentivize or they actually disincentivize these investors to come and invest into the country and do business over here. And thus the ease of doing business ranking should be improved. And as we know that India though has been doing comparatively better in the ease of doing business ranking of the World Bank, but still there are a lot of fields, or there are a lot of criteria in which the India needs to improve. And thirdly, PM Modi's push for self reliant India has rattled skittish investors and small companies that lack resources to overcome the hurdles on the ground. So, as we know, what has happened is that we know we have been hailing forward for the self reliant or Atmanirbhar Bharat. But due to this, what has happened is that various investors have faced lack of resources, and that is why they're not able to overcome the hurdles on these ground. For example, for having Atmanirbhar Bharat or self-reliant India, what we are focusing upon is that the domestic manufacturers or the domestic people are provided more and more incentives and more facilities and resources for the manufacturing and other kinds of activities. Due to which, in case there is a lack of resource, the foreign investors would feel that these basic resources or facilities would not be available if at all they move into our country. Though on the contrary, we have also had the product linked incentive scheme, which is the PLI scheme, which ultimately aims to bring in the foreign investors in the field of various, like the pharmaceuticals, in fields of electronics, etc., to come and settle their manufacturing units in the country. But the government should be more careful while allocating these resources to the domestic as well as the foreign investors and the manufacturers. Now let's understand that why the MNCs or the multinational corporations are interested in India. So what are the basic reasons, or what are the basic benefits that the country provides, and why at all they are attracted towards coming into and settling business in the country? Firstly, sheer demographics. So as we know that nearly 1.4 billion people are there with their growing purchasing power. As we know that if we talk about the population of India, the purchasing power. Now what is the purchasing power? For example, we go to a shopping mall, right? So there is a sweater that I really liked. That sweater cost approximately, let's say, 1000 rupees. Now in my account I have, let's say, 5000 rupees, or maybe let's say 10,000 rupees. So there is a chance that I can easily afford this particular sweater, which is just for rupees 1000. Thus my purchasing power of this sweater is affordable, and thus by virtue of this purchasing power I would be able, or I would be in a position to buy this sweater. But let's say, for example, the sweater still is for 1000 rupees, but all I have in my account is just, let's say, 800 rupees or 2000 rupees. So definitely I have to take care of my other expenses as well, and I would not be in the capacity to buy this sweater worth rupees 1000 just because I have only 2000 rupees, let's say, in my account. So thus my purchasing power determines as to what and what level of commodities or what luxury of commodities can I buy or afford. That is why, since the economy of the country is increasing and the per capita income of every individual is also increasing, thus the purchasing power or the purchasing capacity of its population is also increasing. And thus, with this increase in the purchasing power, Indians or the Indian population are actually rendering to become a huge market as consumers as well for the various foreign investors that come and settle into India. Second, shifting geopolitics. So basically, the rise in the China-US trade war has redefined global landscape for investment and manufacturing. Now, as we know that China, within a few years alone, had become the manufacturing hub for almost all and major countries of the world. But now, since it has been more than 2 years now that this trade war is going on between China and US, so many countries that earlier were using the Chinese industries or the Chinese manufacturing hubs for manufacturing or using it as one of the major components of their supply chain are actually thinking of relocating their manufacturing units to other potential countries. And in this scenario, India has turned out to be a very potential country, though this realization took actually a bit longer time for the country like India to realize. But still, as we discussed, the PLI scheme, which is the production linked incentive scheme, has actually incentivized the companies and countries to move out from China and relocate their manufacturing units in the country, which is India. Thirdly, rising digital connectivity. So basically, digital revolution in India due to cheap mobile data these days has connected estimatedly 700 million Indians to the internet. And even after the lockdown has been proclaimed, approximately 13% users have increased that were using the internet. And also the availability of very cheap mobile data has actually connected, as what we are seeing here, more than 700 million Indians to the internet, which ultimately makes the digital divide decreasing, and also it helps to us to connect better with the digital world. And fourthly, we have the national resilience. So India managed the pandemic better than many of its Western peers and restored economic activity before implementing mass vaccination program. So as we know that the lockdown, it was opened up even before we had the vaccines in hand. So comparatively, India has fared well and has performed better as compared to the various countries in the Western world. And thus, this shows our national resilience and the capacity that India has in its national front. With this, let's discuss the second article for the day, which talks about treating unpaid work. We have basically discussed this article several times by now, but the reason why we took this article today was that very good steps that can be taken by the government have been proposed in this particular article, and thus they were important. So we'll take this into very short as to what do we mean by the unpaid work and what is this particular idea of paying the domestic chores. So many political parties have recognized the unpaid work of women and have demanded wages for the housewives. So just like many of us, are the mothers in our home and various other females that we know of, mostly, many of them work as the housemakers or the housewives, and thus they do a lot of work. But this work is associated with the domestic chores of the house, and ultimately this work is not paid up. So, the disproportionate burden of unpaid work imposed by the patriarchal norms having roots of all pervasive gender equalities. So, this article proposes that, as we know, that this work which the women do at home, it is unpaid. Now, when this work is unpaid, many a times it is underestimated and it is considered that the women are adding nothing to the economy and maybe they're doing nothing for the welfare of the society. But if at all we try to calculate the labor that she actually offers or serves in the domestic household, so it is basically beyond a lot of she actually deserves a lot of remuneration. And that is why many political parties have now come up with this idea of even paying the women for their domestic work. So, if we talk about the implementation and the problems in the implementation, first is the affordability of government and calculation of amounts. So, the very basic problem that lies here is that would at all the government be able to afford the expense of paying the domestic work or not? And if at all it thinks that it is affordable, by what means shall the work be calculated and what shall be the criteria and the basic, the basic tenets of deciding as to what work or what amount of the work has to be paid, what amount of money? Then the women may not be eager to enter the labor market. So if at all we want to ask the women that they should quit the domestic work and should enter the formal labor market, so there are many women who might not be eager to enter the labor market. Now that could be because of their domestic various responsibilities that they have, because of their children, or various the family issues and such other reasons. Then the wages may confirm unpaid work as women's only work. This is the biggest problem that exists in the sociological psychology, that if at all we start paying the women for household work, there might be a chance that in the coming days, in the future generations, it might be thought that this is the only work the women should do, and that is why they are being paid for that work. And it might create the glass ceilings, or even it might create even lesser opportunities for them to move outside and participate into the formal labor force. So if at all we are thinking to bring in this idea, this psychological development should also be taken place at the society at large. So here, this article also proposes that there is a better idea in this direction, that rather we should be providing pension to the old women who are above the age of 60 years. So that can actually help them or take care of various expenses or various kinds of resources that they might want, be it for the health sector or for their health care, or basic food or other kinds of resources which they might need in the old age. Now, the main crux of this article, which says that what can the government do in this direction, it says that the government can recognize the unpaid work in national database by a sound time survey and use data in national policies to firstly improve technology. For example, the government should provide better fuel for cooking. So that can be the first step if you really want to improve the position of the women or improve the condition of the women in the country, that we should improve better technologies or give in better structures or better infrastructure, like for example better cooking fuel. So like this, we have the schemes like Ujjwala scheme, which is there, which provides these cylinders at the subsidies. So such schemes should be there, which should be provided more rigorously. Second, better infrastructure, like the water should be available at doorstep, and they should be the water should be available in the taps itself, and thus the women should not feel the necessity to walk for miles and just bring water for themselves and their family. Thirdly, shift some unpaid work to mainstream economy, like childcare, care of disabled and chronically sick. Like this, these are the kinds of work which women in every other household they are doing, like they're taking care of the children, taking care of the disabled family members if at all, and also they're taking care of the people or the elders who are chronically sick in the family. So these works, or these kinds of work which are currently unpaid, can be brought in the mainstream economic activities, and then they can be ultimately paid. Like for example, the crash which we have, they are paid services. So such services can also be taken care of for the other activities like disabled and chronically sick people. Fourthly, make basic services accessible to women. This can be even as basic as the use of internet, smart devices, digital knowledge, education, etc. So these should also be made available to the women. And fifthly, redistribute work between men and women by providing incentives and disincentives to men, and financial incentives for sharing housework. So as we had discussed, that psychological and sociological change in this direction is also much required, wherein the men should also be incentivized to contribute into the household work, and thus they should also be made to share the housework along with the women. So here there is a linkage, a deep linkage between unpaid work and the economy. So here it says that according to the GDP, which is the gross domestic product, is a measure of the total production and consumption of the economy that takes place in a specific period of time. So the household produces goods and services for its members. And thus, just imagine that if these goods and services also are included in the mainstream GDP, then definitely the GDP can increase fold some values. Then, if we talk about the macro level, that is at the larger level, unpaid work subsidizes the private sector by providing it a generation of workers. So, as we know that if at all a person is able to work in a formal sector, for example, there is a husband who works into a labor market, who formally works, is because there is someone, probably there is a woman who stays at his home, takes care of his children, cooks food for him, and takes care of other household chores. And that is why this unpaid work, or this whole labor of the unpaid work, actually makes it possible that we have a generation of workers that actually is there in the long term. And that is why it takes care of wear and tear of the labor who are the family members. And that is why they ultimately are making it very important and very much possible for these people to participate formally in the labor force, just because everything in their homes is settled, and thus they also are contributing largely to the economic growth. Then the unpaid work also subsidizes the government by taking care of the old, sick, and the disabled. Just imagine if that these women do not take care of the old, sick, and disabled people or the family members, the entire burden of taking care of these people would fall on the government, and thus the government would have to have the old age homes and more of the hospitals, public healthcare centers, etc. But a huge burden of that is reduced, since women at work at home, they take care of these people or their family members. Then it privately produces public good critical for the sustenance of the mainstream economy, and thus exclusion of this work from the economy shows a clear male bias, which definitely is not a good sign if we really want to make at least Indian economy to be an all-encompassing and ever-growing economy. And thus it is high time that we also consider the importance of this unpaid work at the domestic level and start paying them at par with the men. With this, let's discuss the final article for the day, which talks about right to counsel in custody. So recently, why at all this particular topic is in news? Because the arrested assistant police inspector Sachin Vaze was insisting on his lawyer being present during the interrogation in Mumbai, basically, and filed an application seeking to be allowed to meet his lawyer in private in custody. So with this, let's understand that what are the rights of an accused to assess a lawyer. So, as far if we talk about India, Article 20, Clause 3 of the Constitution and Article 22 protect accused against self-incrimination and right to consult a lawyer. Now, if we talk about Article 20, Clause 3, it says that no accused or no person shall be forced to give an evidence against himself. So, that is the right against self-incrimination. But please be careful that this right of self-incrimination does not say that even the important documents would not be produced by the accused. So, if at all there are any kinds of documents, any affidavits, then they shall be produced by the accused, but he shall not be forced to give a testimony or a witness against himself. Like, for example, I'll give you a very basic example of this. If a person A has committed a murder of person B, then this person A, definitely the accused, has seen himself, committing this particular murder, but he cannot himself be made a witness against, his own self. So that is the right against self-incrimination. And under Article 22, we have the right to consult a lawyer while we are in custody. Then, Section 41D of the Criminal Procedure Code entitles an accused to meet an advocate of his choice during interrogation and not throughout. So, this was held in the case of D.K. Basu case in the 1997, wherein this is a very important case when it comes to the rights of the accused. So, Section 41D of the CRPC also provides the right to counsel. Then, if we talk about the ICCPR, which basically is the International Covenant on civil and political rights, it affirms that the right of an accused to be provided legal assistance exists, and thus the accused shall not be denied for this basic right. And if we talk about the Miranda rights or the Miranda warning in US, it provides that the police informs arrested his right to talk to a lawyer and have him during questioning. So the police will have to inform the arrested person that he has the right to talk to a lawyer, and thus such right shall be provided to the accused. So, in the case of Senior Intelligence Officer versus Jugal Kishore Sharma of 2011, the Supreme Court took into consideration alleged threats given to an accused of being subjected to third-degree methods as well as his medical condition, and thus it allowed the accused's lawyer to watch the proceedings from a distance or from beyond a glass partition to make sure that no such third-degree torture is given to the accused. With this, let's understand that what were the basic and most important guidelines that were given in the D.K. Basu versus State of West Bengal case. Firstly, the police officer should bear clear identification and name tags with their designation. Then, the police officer shall prepare a memo of arrest which shall contain signature, the time and the date of arrest. Then, inform the relative or friend about the arrest at a particular place. Then, the time, place of arrest and venue of custody must be notified if relative lives outside the district. Next, the person arrested must be made aware of his rights to have someone informed of his arrest. And finally, the arrested person has the right to consult a lawyer during the interrogation. With this, let's see what do we have for news in flash today. World Water Day. So UN celebrates 22nd March every year to raise awareness regarding the importance of fresh water, and the theme for 2021 is valuing water. So basically, the background of the World Water Day is that it was adopted in 1992 at the Rio de Janeiro UN Conference on Environment and Development. Secondly, King Anangpal II of Delhi. So Center formed a committee to popularize the legacy of the 11th century Tomar king Anangpal. So basically the dynasty was Tomar dynasty, Anangpal II, crediting him for giving Delhi its present name, Anangpal Tomar. He belonged to the Tomar dynasty that ruled parts of the present day Delhi and Haryana between 8th and 12th centuries. So this is very important, that who basically was the one who gave Delhi, or basically he's considered to be as the founder of Delhi, is the King Anangpal II of the Tomar dynasty. So this was all for the day. We hope it was a good and informative session for you all. Thank you so much, and stay tuned with Law Seekho for such more sessions to come.